All right, everyone, we're going to get started here now. So as you can see on the screen right here, it's been up for a little while. It's just a quick overview of what we're going to be going over. We're going to be talking about setting up your account, listing items, and then checking the results to make sure that all your updates are going through correctly. And then also finally bulk listing and sort of how to use Amazon with the bulk system. Okay, so let's get started here. Just going to shrink that away. So I have up here logged into one of our demo accounts with SureDone. And the first thing you're going to need to do is set up your account. So that's under the settings. Now, Amazon functions a little bit differently than some of the channels you might be used to, such as eBay. For example, instead of creating your own listings, you actually all sell on one specific listing. Now, I know a lot of you probably already sell on Amazon, that's why you're here, but just want to give you a quick overview for anybody that might be new to Amazon or is interested in joining up and using Amazon. So here is an example of a listing on Amazon, and as you notice here, there's one page for the Rubik's Cube, and then there's actually 9 people, or 10 total probably, selling this Rubik's Cube, right? So everybody kind of puts their price, a little bit of details, maybe they sell a used one, and they describe the condition, and everybody posts to the same listing. That's the way Amazon's set up. It's supposed to be a great buyer experience, and it's been pretty successful for them. So keep that in mind as we're talking about how to create listings and things like that. Okay, so the next thing that's very different is that they don't provide real-time feedback. So they ask us to queue up our updates to Amazon. We send them all to Amazon, and then they return a response to us after they're finished processing. Now that happens usually about 30 minutes after the update happens. Depends, sort of how long Amazon takes to process. And those specific things all show up in your history. So we'll get into that later, but that's why it's very important to check the results and make sure that all your updates are going through correctly, and then to adjust them if you're having issues with it. The last thing to really talk about is the fact that there's a lot of things in Amazon that require approval. For example, specific categories do require approval, and special features such as fulfilled by Amazon and stuff that we're not really going to dive into. But if you have any questions about those specifically, I'm happy to answer them at the end. And we will be holding additional trainings and webinars on things like fulfilled by Amazon specifically. Okay. So the first thing you want to do is you're going to be setting up your accounts, and that is under Settings, Channels, same place you'll find your eBay settings. And now there's not a lot of settings here. You just have obviously the sync on and off, and you'll have to authorize your Amazon account. And then there's the FBA sync. If you're using our FBA feature, to turn this on. If you're not using the FBA feature, you can just turn that off and not worry about it. The last really important thing here to note is the UPC field mapping. Now, for most people, you're either listing with an ASIN or a UPC or perhaps an exemption. You don't have to mess with this setting at all. But if, for example, you list with EANs or GTINs, you'll actually want to change this to map that. Now, what that's going to do is it just tells SureDone what kind of values you're going to be putting into the UPC field. Of course, by default, it's UPC, but if you list products using ISBNs, you just set it to ISBN, pop that ISBN in the UPC field in the Create Product page, and we'll just know to tell Amazon that it's an ISBN. You don't actually really need to use the ASIN one because there is a separate ASIN fields. That was for a little bit of an older set of customers that were doing things a certain way, and we just wanted to continue supporting that option for them. Now, Amazon's interesting in how they categorize products because unlike eBay, they don't just have one straight category tree. So I want to take a minute to explain that and then why the Amazon XML mapping exists and how it works. So they have the top level category, which are things you're familiar with, very broad. Like, for example, this one's in toys and games. There's apparel. There's automotive and things like that. And those are the top level category. Now, the next category you go down into is the subcategory, which is sometimes called the item type. And that is a more specific version of what it is we're talking about. So the item types are things like puzzle boxes or brain teasers. And that, I'll show you here real quick while we're talking about it. can be found in the editor in the Amazon section right here. And that works, the search for that works the same way the eBay one does, with the exception of you should pick the top level first, and then it sort of filters down. And we'll go back over this when we talk about listing, but, and then it sort of shows you a number, right? So that's the item type. Now what that does is it tells Amazon which category to put it in. They have a second classification called the product type. Now what the product type does is the product type tells Amazon a little bit more about the product. It helps them categorize it even better in different various search filters. It also allows them to tell you what fields and attributes you can associate with the product. For example, in a apparel might have a neck style or sleeve length, but toys and games wouldn't. So if the product type is for apparel, I believe the product type for apparel is called product clothing. If you send in that kind of product type, they'll ask you for information like sleeve length, neck style. SureDone automatically selects the product types for you based on the category you're listing in. For example, we can tell if you're listing in, apparel, t-shirts, we know you're selling clothing and we're going to send in the product clothing. However, sometimes you may wish to send in a different one, and I'll show you how you can actually manually override our choice and select your own product type, if that causes you any issues. But I just want to explain that because sometimes, there's a miscommunication there, then people get the two mixed up. So really it's important to understand the difference between the item type and the product type that Amazon has set up. So what you'll find in here, and this is why I kind of mentioned it, is all of these XML mappings are for the different product types. So you'll see that shoes, which would fall under the apparel category, has its own product type and therefore has its own set of, mappings you have to do. So if you sell both shoes and clothing, make sure you set up product clothing and shoes. So I hope that makes sense there. So what the XML mapping is it tells SureDone where to grab the values for that specific attribute in Amazon. So we did a mapping which allows you to sort of make the account a little custom. It allows you to use the same field twice for different things. For example, if you wanted the manufacturer part number to just be the SKU, you could do that rather than having to type it twice. If you're already using the manufacturer part number as your internal SKU, you can do that. So that's why that's set up this way. And so, for example, I already have this one set up a little bit. I have brand. I have MPN set to manufacturer part number. Condition note to notes, same place they are for eBay, and things like that. Then you can also, to select these, all you really have to do is you go to a particular product type. In this case, I'm going to set up toys. And you just kind of find, it's a long list, so sometimes it just helps to use Control F to search. I'm looking for the manufacturer age recommendations because that's a required field in the toys category. And I'm just going to set up these custom fields that I made here. If you're not familiar with how to make custom fields, we will send you the guide to it just to remind you, but I believe I have it right here. Yep. You can just fill out this page and create a custom field. So all I did was min age, or I think it was Amazon min age, and then I put min recommended age for the field, and that's just a field you can fill out. I selected integer. It doesn't really matter. Varchar will work for just about anything. Integer, though, just provides that extra security that I'm not going to accidentally type in the wrong kind of information. It'll only take integers. And then lastly, you can choose whether or not you want to display it on your site. So if you have it displayed on, it can be displayed on your SureDone storefront. It can be displayed in your eBay listings, etc. If you have it as displayed off, that doesn't happen, though. Okay? So once you create that custom user field, then it will show up automatically in this list, and you'll be able to map it. Okay? So one thing you might be wondering is, how do I know which ones are required and which ones aren't? Because obviously there's a lot, and they're not all relevant to your product. For example, a Rubik's Cube doesn't have batteries, so there's no reason for me to set up battery type, or, I could type are batteries required and say no. The way you do that is actually using a file that Amazon provides us, and that's called the file template uploader. Now, it's actually designed for their bulk uploading tool inside Amazon, so there are some differences, but I'm going to show you how you can use that to really understand what to upload. There's a guide on it on the website, setting up your Amazon product details, And you can just click here to view the inventory templates, scroll down to the product type you're selling. So in this case, toys and games. Download that file. It's opening up. Give me 1 second. Yeah. And we're going to send all these guides to you, for reference, but I just want to be able to walk you through it. If this file asks you to enable macros when you open it, you can disable them. They're not needed for what we're using. As I said, Amazon has these for another purpose as well. So in here has every field that you can submit for toys in Amazon. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger for you guys. Okay, now we got the full screen going on. And you'll see they're color-coded, so some are the same for every, like basic is the same every single time. It's the SKU and stuff like that, the brand, part numbers. Offers is things like the price. And that's the same for every product type and every category. But if you get down here, you'll start to see that it breaks apart into like different product types and things like that. So what you'll see in here, though, is for toys and games, you'll see this list of required, preferred, and optional fields. So at the top, some things obviously like SKU and product ID are always required on Amazon, but in some categories, other things are as well. In this case, toys and games, I'm required to submit a minimum age and a minimum unit of measure for that age. So I'm required to send those, and they ask that I set a top bound too, but they don't require it. They may give you a warning saying that you should, but your listing will still go through if you don't do that. So what I did there is I made sure I set that up. Okay, Amazon min age, Amazon max age, and right below it is where you put the unit of measure. So this one's a little long, so it's getting cut off. I don't have to see if they can fix that the design there, but right below it there's unit of measure. In this case, it's years or months, so I just typed years. For other things, sometimes it might be inches, feet, meters. The nice thing about the way this is set up is once you've set this up once, you're pretty much good. Unless you branch off, you were selling just shirts and now you're selling shoes, you may have to go back and reset up shoes. But for each product type, once you have it set up, you can just kind of save and forget it. So I'm going to save this here. And the last thing I'll show you in the XML mapping is that there's other things as well. So, if you guys do shipping overrides, we have a separate guide on that, but you would set that up in here. Inventory fields, there are some special inventory fields or price fields if you want to use map, for example. Map rules, you can kind of put that stuff in here. As well as just universal things that apply to all of your products. Bullet points and things like that. So you can sort of set that up however you want. Again, a lot of these you don't need, but they're all there for any seller that wishes to use them. Okay. So now that we kind of set that up, you would just sort of move in and to add an instance. Sorry, I wanted to show you how to add an instance. So to add an instance is pretty simple. As you can see here, I already have a separate instance for Amazon clothing. Let's say that I wanted to add an instance here. Could add an Amazon instance. And maybe I've decided to open a store for the UK. So I can create an Amazon UK. Save the settings. And it'll create an Amazon UK set of options. I would have to go in and log into my account and authorize it. And then it's essentially the exact same thing. You're going to set up the XML mapping again, stuff like that. So each Amazon instance is a completely separate thing. The settings are separate and all of that. So that's one thing to keep in mind is if you have two Amazon accounts, you want to set up the XML settings for each individually. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually show you how to add or list an item. Now there's three main ways you can be listing an item. The first is with an ASIN, which is an Amazon Standard Identification Number. It's sort of like a unique number that every product on Amazon has. The second is a UPC or some other form of a Universal Product Code or an EAN or an ISBN, varies from industry. And then lastly is with an exemption. An exemption is something Amazon grants you special. You have to contact them to get it. And it's just saying, for example, you make the product yourself, or you sell in an industry that doesn't have UPCs, like car parts, and you really, need to be able to list without UPCs. Amazon will ask you for some extra verification data to kind of prove you're legit, and then sometimes they'll grant you that that exemption. And now I'm going to show you how to set up and list with each of those different methods. So of course you want to go to the main products. You're just going to click all products. I'll just jump to it here. And then you can click add product right there. To start with, I'm actually going to open an existing product just to sort of show you how it's set up. And then we'll add one. So of course, the first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to list your general product information, such as the title, the price, how many you have in stock. And interestingly enough, the things that are required for you to list on Amazon are going to be all the things here along the left-hand side. So Amazon always requires a title, price, and stock, of course. And they almost always require you to submit a brand, even if you're listing to an existing product. That's sort of like a safety check they have to make sure that you're really listing the same product and not a similar one. And then lastly, the condition, right? So you want to select new. If you are going to sell something used, I highly recommend you come down here and pick like new, very good, good, acceptable, rather than just the regular used. It provides a little bit more detail and it can actually help your sales a lot. I believe if you just select used, it by default goes to acceptable. So if you have a pretty good, condition product, make sure you show that off by telling everyone it's very good, and then leave some condition notes to describe that in more detail. Okay. So the other thing I'm going to do real quick here is I'm just going to deselect these other channels just so we don't mess with any of that information in there. Okay, you can assign it a SKU and all that. And the first method I'm going to show you is how to list with an ASIN. So coming down here, if I want to use the same title and the same price, as you can see, they're automatically filled out. So pulled out from the title and the price from the top. Or, you could just overwrite that completely and type whatever you want here. And we'll use this title instead. But I have no reason to do that, so I'm going to, leave it blank. Okay. To list with an ASIN, it's pretty easy. As I mentioned, remember to add the brand up top because they're usually pretty picky about that. But after that, all you have to do is go on their site, find an ASIN. For example, the ASIN for this, it's always under the product details. The ASIN right here. Oh, sorry, wrong tab. And you can drop it right in there. Now, you'll notice that once I added the ASIN, I'm in the wrong, there we go, I have the ASIN here. Once I add the ASIN, the star in front of the subcategory went away, because if you're listing with an ASIN, that's literally all you need. You need the brand, the title, the price, and the condition, and the ASIN. So that goes away, and then I could just click retry item, and it should push to Amazon, and Amazon will respond later and let us know if it went through successfully. Now, let's say you don't have the ASIN, or you have UPCs, and going and getting all the ASINs is rather difficult. So the UPCs you can fill out up here in the general section when you're entering your information, because again, the UPC is something we can send to eBay, we can send it everywhere, that's why it's up here. So let's say you want to enter a UPC, and I happen to just, for curiosity's sake, I pulled up the UPCA code for a Rubik's Cube, and let's just add ourselves a Rubik's Cube to Amazon right now. So go up to the top, type in the title, Rubik's Cube, and we're selling a special edition Rubik's Cube. We'll charge $20 for it. And we have 3 in stock. We'll just say the brand's Rubik's. There's actually a lot of brands, but I'm not actually going to be trying to list this because this is hooked up to a sandbox account. It's not like live on Amazon because we test a lot with it. So go right here, and it'll be a brand new one. Again, I want to disconnect all these. And I'm going to add the UPC code here. Now, I would recommend you remove the spaces, so no spaces in the UPC code. And then we can just jump right to the Amazon section. In this case, I'm going to get rid of the ASIN, and I'm going to specify the Amazon subcategory. So you're going to select toys and games, type in brain teaser, and select it right here. I'm just going to go with this one here. It's going to automatically put that number in here. Of course, just like with eBay, if you have these numbers, you're listing in the same 5 subcategories all the time, you can have this. Oh,
Don't worry about questions.
no, it just paused. My connection went down. I lost internet. If you're in the chat, can you let them know that it's reconnecting? Crap, I have no idea what's happening. I'm going to turn off my Wi-Fi and put it back on. Did you tell them that we're...
Yep.
Okay. I have to edit this part out of the recording. Oh my goodness, I have no idea why this is happening. Oh, it's getting to the wrong one. You don't have any issues with the internet, right?
No, I'm chatting with them right now.
Oh my goodness. This is so embarrassing. I can't even connect to the Wi-Fi. Hold on, let me do this first. I'm gonna bookmark all tabs. Webinar.
I would offer you to come over here, but...
I think it's... Okay, we got it. Hi guys, can you all hear me okay now? Sorry about that. Not sure the internet went down on my computer. If you guys can hear me, can a few people just, chat in the chat box? And viewer 1, I do see your question. I will get to it at the end of the seminar. Okay, thank you very much. So I'm going to continue. Again, I apologize for that, but it looks like everything's working okay again. So here we have here. I'm already going to leave the title and the price here, the Rubik's Cube. And the last thing I'll say on this section, especially if you're listening to a new item or you're listing your own, you can do this for listing with ASINs as well. It does help, but is the Amazon search keywords. So Amazon search keywords are, you can have up to 5 of them. They can be 50 characters each, and they just sort of help. They're literally that. They're search terms, like words that if people type in these phrases, it'll help pull your product up. It's just Amazon's way of helping, the search filter process. So, for example, you could put in here, like, great toy for kids, and then exercise your brain. Puzzle cube. Try to do things that you think people will type in. So puzzle cubes would go in, like maybe they can't remember the name of Rubik's Cube, etc. So when you just separate those 5 phrases by commas, and we send them to Amazon. They do have a 50 character limit each. So you'll get an error if you try to submit, a longer string. Okay. So once that, you'll notice again that when I added the subcategory, the ASIN star disappears because you're only required to put one or the other. And lastly, I think, because I'm not sure where I got cut off, I did want to tell you that similarly to eBay, if you just take the number here and you put that number straight in, so for example, if I just, you just saw me do it, I can just go like this, and it'll automatically fill out the information for you, similar to so if you're listing the same 5 or 6 categories all day, every day, you can also just write those numbers down and then just type them in manually rather than having to go through the search if you find that's faster for you. You'll also need these in bulk. You'll need to use the number, so it's useful. Okay, and then let's say this. Maybe you want to add an image. To add images, you're just going to jump down to the media section. It's the same thing if you wanted to list with an ASIN. It's just that the images are not as important when listing with an ASIN. Go to the desktop here. I'll grab my Rubik's Cube picture. And you can just upload it there. You can use the image editor if you find that you need it. But I'm not going to push it right now because my internet is already acting up. So I don't want to add any more complications to it. But yeah, you can just add that there. Shipping for Amazon is pretty much set by Amazon in your account settings, so you don't really need to go into the shipping section all too often. But again, you can if you want to use the shipping overrides and stuff like that. I recommend you check out our guide we have on that, and we can get more into details on that and do a training in that in the future. So then you just click add, and it'll add the product like that. But again, one thing to note is that it's not going to add right away. It's just going to add to the queue, and then Amazon's going to process their request in about 30 minutes, and they'll get a response back to it. So now we're going to move on. The one note I wanted to make is when listing with UPC, you can either do it to a new product or an existing product. So just like we listed to an existing ASIN, if you put a UPC that's already listed on Amazon, it's going to group that together, and that's why Amazon asks for the UPC. So this would technically go to this listing now, right? So I would be the 10th new under here. Again, since we're not hooked up to the real Amazon, since it's a test account, it's not going to actually show up on their website, but things like that. Now, the reason I say that it's different is if you're listing to a new product completely, like your new UPC, it's very important that you include a little bit of additional information. For example, Amazon's going to request that you include bullet points, definitely include images, and also include a product description. The reason you want to do that is because this is a new product. This information doesn't exist. When you're listening to an existing listing, it's not as important because there's people that have already written it for you. In fact, if you do include a title, you'll notice a lot of times they don't use your title or your images. They just use their own information. The reason they do that is they have like this complex algorithm between who has the lowest price, who is the largest seller, FBA helps, and then also, sometimes the manufacturers, like Winning Moves right here, could have written this, and then they obviously favor, the manufacturer's description of their own product over just some random person. Okay? So, moving along, you want to make sure you include, some extra product details. Even down here, you'll see other things like model numbers, manufactured recommended age. That's actually required, but, some of this other information that you might not always want to include, but if you're listing a new product, is very, very smart. Now, the last thing is going to be the exemption. So I don't want to get too into it because it's kind of, very niche, but the exemption, we do have a guide, on how to do that. But all you really have to do is it's a custom user field, and then you're going to map in XML settings your registered parameters. So for example, I think I have it open already. If not, I'll just open a new one. Yep. You're going to make a custom user field, and we'll call it Amazon exemption. Amazon exemption. Just set it as the regular varchar. Save that. And one thing I want to note, actually, is if you have an exemption, the parameter will almost always be the same. So for most customers, you get a private label exemption. And what you want to do then is you can actually just type that as the default value when you create the field. And what it'll do is every time you create a new product, it'll automatically fill that field out. So you don't have to type private label every single time you're adding a new product. So that's actually a very useful thing to do, is to add the default value. Okay, then you're going to go to your settings. I have to refresh them. And all the way at the bottom of the universal product fields, which is the default menu that you're selected on, right there, all the way at the bottom, you'll see a field called registered parameter. And your registered parameter is just what Amazon calls the exemption parameter. So you can save that there. And to get to that, the same place you would get to all your other custom fields to include things like the minimum age would be down here. So if I had a manufacturer part number, I could enter that. I could add my minimum required age. Rated and recommended age, and let's say it's for people 6 to 99. And then the register parameter will show up here. Guess I didn't refresh the page. So let me show you how that works. Open up a new product. Yeah. Again, sorry, my internet's still acting up, I guess. But at the bottom, it would just say register parameter. If you set the default value, you don't even have to worry about it. It'll already be filled out. But if you don't, you can just fill that out there. Okay, and then you just hit save and update the same way. The thing to note here is, of course, if you have the exemption, you don't need the ASIN and you don't need the UPC. However, one thing you do need still is you need some sort of universal sort of standard product identifier is what they call it. So in this case, a manufacturer part number, a style number for clothing they call it, and different things like that. Now, if you're actually manufacturing these products yourself, you could just assign it whatever number, whatever manufacturer you want. If you're selling these products from somebody else, for example, in the auto parts industry, you do need to make sure you actually get the real manufacturer part number and the real brand correct, because that sort of functions for Amazon the same way the UPC code works in, let's say, the brain teasers industry, right? So they'll actually match the brand and manufacturer part number to help organize your listings. So you do still need some sort of standard product ID, and they'll explain that to you when they give you the exemption. So you don't have to worry about that too much. Now, the next thing we're going to talk about is checking the results. Now, checking the results is extremely important when listing to Amazon because, as I mentioned earlier, the feedback is not real time. Like eBay, if you have an error, the error pops up right away because eBay lets you know there's a problem. Amazon takes about 30 minutes to get back to us. And if you go here, what we did to figure out a good way to resolve that, for those of you who have been with us long, you used to have to go download a CSV, like Excel file, and sort of get the results from there. Now what we do is we populate the results at the bottom of every page. And we actually do this for every channel, but it's especially important for Amazon. So here you'll see the identifier of the SKU at the time it was pushed. So this SKU actually got changed at some point. And you'll see the channel. So this here would say Amazon. And then you have the different types. So in this case, the item and the result. Those are really the ones you want to look at. So you want to look at type, result, channel, and the identifier for this is less important because you already know what item you're on. But what it'll say here is it'll say Amazon, and you'll see a couple, 4 to be specific, different feeds. You'll see an item feed, an inventory feed, a price feed, and an image feed. Those are all treated separately by Amazon, and they can all succeed or fail on their own. Generally speaking, they usually either all succeed or fail together. But, for example, if there's some issue with your images, they might choose to accept the product but not your image. So the way that works is you'll see an error here, and it'll say item, error, and then you can actually click into the identifier, and you can get more information. So at the bottom, if there was an error, for example here, there was an Etsy error on this item when we tried to update it, but it'll say Amazon or AMZN, and then it'll tell you what the error was. So for example, it's usually that you forgot to include a required field or that you're violating one of their policies, and they'll just tell you right here. Or you made a spelling mistake, and they're actually pretty good about this. They'll usually tell you what field is violating and then how you can resolve it. For example, if they say keywords of maximum 50 characters must be submitted, you know that it's because you submitted a keyword that has more than 50 characters. The other example is if they say, you misspelled something or you put it like a not valid value, they'll usually give you a list of values you can submit. So that'll be there in the error. Now, of course, you don't want to have to check on every single item if you're doing a lot of listing. So what we have to set to deal with that use case is we have the item history. So if you go to history, you can actually click here. You can add a filter for the result. You want to go to the result, contains the word error. And then you want to select the specific channel that you're trying to check. So if you're trying to check Amazon main, like this, apply the filter, and it's only going to show you up errors with Amazon on it. Now, of course, let me show you without the errors, because actually without the Amazon, because this isn't hooked up to the real Amazon, so they don't send us back error messages. But you'll see here, it'll just sort of populate the same way it showed in the other editor. The only difference is it will have any and every SKU you can think of here, right? And it works the same way. You just click on the first field, and it'll give you more information about it if there's any errors or not. So you can do it on the entire account level. It's highly recommended that you do this at least once every day. I would go in, I would select the errors filter. So again, result contains error, and I'd select your Amazon account or your entire account if you'd like to look at everything, and check once a day for errors, and then correct any errors that you have in there. And that'll just make sure that your inventory is syncing, that your products are syncing, and things like that. While we're here, I will mention about how the sync works. So the sync works based on the Amazon SKU, or in the bulk file, as you see, it's called AMZN SKU. That matches the seller SKU in Seller Central on Amazon. Those two SKUs must be exactly the same. And for that purpose, we submit it automatically if you're creating a new product. It just is the same SKU that you're using in SureDone. And we don't let you edit that without special override access. So if you ever have an issue with that, I recommend you contact support at suredone.com/support. And the reason for that is we just don't want people accidentally making a bulk upload and changing their Amazon SKUs and putting things all out of whack. It's very easy to sort of make that typo. So again, the Amazon SKU and the Seller Central SKU are going to be the exact same, and that's how we sync. Similar to with eBay, we do it by eBay ID. It's the same thing. So the last section I do want to cover is I want to make sure that I cover the bulk files. So let's go to, I have an example spreadsheet here. Pull that up. It's in the other window. Just drag it over here. Trying to drag it over. Oh, there we go. Here we go. So I just have an example item that I could add to Amazon using the bulk. Again, if you're not familiar with bulk at all, we will be holding a webinar on bulk next week. I actually believe next Tuesday. We're actually doing one on variations next week and one on bulk next week. So you can attend both of those. We also have guides on bulk specifically. It's actually a new series. You can check it out, and we'll send you the link to that as well. So right here, I just have the basic information, things you'll be familiar with, the brand, the UPC, etc. Again, you have ASINs. So again, you see I have a UPC and an ASIN. Don't need both. In fact, we recommend that if you have both, pick one, probably the ASIN because it requires less information to submit. Because if for some reason you have a mistake in one of them, it's just another reason to give an error. If they don't match, if they're like this UPC and this ASIN don't match, they'll just give you an error. So you don't, you just want to include as little information as possible that's, to submit. So in fact, I'll get rid of the UPC in this case. You can upload your custom user fields. So I have the manufacturer age minimum, manufacturer age maximum that I submitted there. The item type number, which we got from the search, put right there. And then any other information. If you had other user fields, you could add those. If you wanted to have a specific Amazon title, you could create a field for that. Right? And we can go like Amazon title. Type that in, new title. As well as Amazon FBA. The only thing you really need to know about that is it's either on, which is usually for most of our customers, Amazon North America, or it's off. Now, if you always just don't use FBA, your account settings, leave it set to off. You don't need that header. That header is only if you do some items FBA, some items not, back and forth. The last thing I want to explain to you about sort of how this works is the different instances. So you see there's the Amazon 1 ASIN and Amazon 2 ASIN, Amazon 1 item type, Amazon 2 item type. That is what specifies which instance you're uploading this to. Because again, as I mentioned, they're all considered completely separate. So your Amazon first instance and your Amazon second instance are separate separate accounts as far as SureDone goes. You can just manage them from one SureDone account. So if you have one instance, don't worry about it. You don't need the number. You can just fill things out. Literally just Amazon item type. If you add the one, it's not going to break anything, so don't worry. But if you have one instance, you don't need to worry about the number. If you have two instances, though, it's very important you include the 1, the 2, the 3, 2, however many you have. And they just go in order that you see them in the settings. The last thing I'll show you is actually a pretty new feature in SureDone, is the ability to skip inline. So before, some of you that have been using the bulk uploader before, remember we have the skip eBay, skip Amazon buttons before you upload. You can now actually do that straight in the spreadsheet. Because let's just say that I was adding, and we'll copy this down. Let's say I was adding 3 Rubik's Cubes or 4 Rubik's Cubes, and they were like different editions and things like that. And one I didn't want to sell on Amazon, I just wanted to sell on eBay. I could actually just type true in the Amazon 1 skip field, and it would skip just that item for Amazon. So this is going to submit all of them to Amazon 2 and just 3 of them to Amazon 1. Additionally, I could just skip all of these. And lastly, we still have that master checkbox. So you don't have to actually type it in for all of them. If you're going to skip the entire spreadsheet for eBay, for example, you can still check the skip eBay button before you upload the file. So this is just sort of if you want to pick and choose within the same file. Again, if blank just is the same as saying false. It just doesn't skip. If you're not going to do that, though, just delete that. As always, whatever you don't need to include, don't include in the spreadsheet. The last little caveat I'll say here is just for people with an Amazon exemption. Even if you have the default value set up in your user fields, for example, remember I showed you if you type in private label as the default, you don't have to type it every time. In a bulk file, you'll still be required to include it because we send the information straight to Amazon. That way it's the fastest processing. Rather than having to go through SureDone, create a product in the editor, and then send to Amazon, we send it both places at once. So make sure you include any default values for your user fields. You still have to fill out in the bulk spreadsheet if you're adding directly. The other option is to create a draft and then relist it afterwards. And that way it creates in SureDone before we send it. And that's a majority of it for the bulk. And that's a majority for the overall Amazon listing tutorial as a whole. I am going to take a look over and check out some of your questions right now, and hopefully I see Brett's been answering a few for me. But we'll, sort of address them to the entire audience for anybody, that hasn't been following the chat. So just give me 1 second to take a look at that, and then answer your question.